If you're thinking of retiring soon, or maybe you know someone who is, this story is for you. A social media post shared by Governor Maura Healey regarding retirement caught our attention and the attention of a lot of Bay State residents as well. Western Mass News reporter Madison Lasowski getting answers on the #1 destination for retirement.
When you think of retirement, which state do you think of? A recent study shared by Governor Maura Healey inspired us to take to the streets and find out.
Florida.
Definitely Florida?
Yeah, Sunshine State.
Maybe Utah, where my wife's family is, or maybe Florida, where my sister is.
California.
Current Massachusetts residents sharing with Western Mass News that their idea of retirement is elsewhere in the country. But according to a new study by Hire a Helper, Massachusetts was the #1 destination for older adults relocating to a new state specifically for retirement in 2024. The Bay State edged out perennial favorite Florida by 0.5%. Leaving states like Vermont, North Carolina, and New Mexico in the dust, which is something that even current residents are shocked by.
How would you feel if I told you that Massachusetts is apparently the #1 state where people retire?
Really? That's shocking. It's really shocking. It beat Florida?
What would you say if I told you the #1 state for retirement is Massachusetts?
I would be mind-blown.
And their shock was warranted. After all, the state has been dubbed Taxachusetts for decades and is the state with the nation's second highest cost of living. However, among all older migrants making interstate moves, which includes those entering retirement and those already in retirement, the Sunshine State still reigns supreme, with 1 in 5 choosing to settle down there. In this category, Massachusetts trailed to 6th. Still, Governor Healey sharing her optimism on social media, saying in part, with the best health care, plenty to do, and a high quality of life, more older adults are choosing Massachusetts as the place to spend their golden years. At the end of the day, it really just depends on the person.
I wouldn't want to retire here.
I'm retired and I'm here in Massachusetts.
Reporting in Springfield, Madison Lasowski, Western Mass News.